Welcome back to Secondhand Overland. I'm your host, Matt Kester. What's our new phrase? We're an international community of automotive masochists and cash-strapped adventure seekers. Welcome. Today we are going to be replacing the springs and the sway bar end links. I call them end links because they came from the Toyota world, but they are sway bar ball joints in our Land Rover Discovery 1. This is a 1998 North American spec model. We've got some parts here on hand. I've got some Delphi End Links. They are part number TC927-11B1, and they are actually very good quality. I got these from British Parts of Utah. They're the ones that supplied this. I paid full price for them. I got the pair for $40 and shipping included, which was an amazing deal because our usual parts vendor wanted almost $60 per end link and plus shipping. They come in a package. You got a nut, you got a new locking nylock nut for it, the extra bushings. It's really simple. I've already done the other side. And then we will be replacing the spring with a medium rate spring from Therafirm. TF023V as in Victor. They're supposed to be a medium rate spring, which I think is fitting with what our build is. Right now, we've just got the old tired factory springs in here. They're not handling the little amount of weight we've put in, but plus this one here on the right side, it's really got to have a problem because the whole vehicle's leaning to the right. We're gonna get in here, we're gonna replace this spring, we're gonna replace this sway bar ball joint. I've already done shocks on this. I'm kind of joining the work in progress as I didn't want to bore you showing you how we did this, but essentially the back end of the vehicle is jacked up, the front wheels are blocked, the parking brake is set, the transmission is in park. I got her blocked up on some 6-ton jack stands. So the first step we're gonna do is I'm gonna get in here, we're gonna disconnect the sway bar from the sway bar ball joints, and we'll disconnect the bottom nut on the shock absorber, and that should allow our axle to travel enough that if all goes well like it did on the other side, we won't need to put any kind of spring compressor on either the removal or the takeoff side of the spring.
For those of you scoring at home, that's going to be a 24mm socket on a 1/2-inch drive ratchet, and you could use a 24mm spanner on the other side. I don't own one, so I just used a standard 12-inch crescent wrench. I would advise against using a hammer to try to push this bolt out, because if you smack the threads on the end and booger them up, you're going to be needing to go find another bolt. The kit I bought does not come with a new bolt. You're going to have to reuse that old bolt. So let's protect the threads. Just go ahead and use your wrench and your fingers. It should slide right out. After you get the sway bar out of the way, it'll be time to go ahead and get the sway bar ball joint disconnected from the axle. For this, you're going to need a 19mm socket and some needle nose pliers and maybe even some smaller channel locks. Now, don't worry about that cotter pin and that castle nut. You can just throw those away. The new sway bar ball joints are going to come with a nylock nut to secure them. Since we're just going to be throwing away this old ball joint, you don't need to worry about protecting those threads, so get out your blunt force impact applicator and have at it. Now that you got the old one out of the way, go ahead and slide the new one on in and thread the nut on down on it. Check the play, make sure everything feels good on it, and then just go ahead and leave it angled in the down position. Might not be a bad idea to just go ahead and put the bushings in and put the bolt and the nut there so you don't lose them.
But we will not reconnect it to the sway bar until we have the vehicle on the ground with the tires on it. That way we can ensure that it cams back into the right position. I'm gonna get in here. There's like a keeper plate in here. We're gonna disconnect 2 bolts there.
You'll need 2 17mm wrenches to get these bolts out. Now, as you can see, I'm using the flex head gear wrench here, and it's making things a lot easier. If you don't already have one, check out the link in the description below. I'll put one down there. When you're done, make sure you hang on to the hardware, the bolt, the nut, and the bracket plate. They do not come with the springs, so if you didn't acquire new ones, you're going to need to reuse these ones. Once you're finished with that, now comes the real moment of truth. Can you get the spring out? As you can see here, I'm kind of wiggling it to test things out. you want to make sure when you're doing this that the vehicle is thoroughly blocked up and you're not putting any part of your body underneath the frame or the axle, just in case something bad happens and it comes crashing down, you're not underneath there. Now, what I figured out was I can just put a little bit of downward pressure out here on the end of the hub, and the spring should come right out.
So what you saw there was pretty simple, actually. I was able to get that spring out without even having to unbolt the bottom shock bolt. And that is maybe due to the fact that we have a lowered top shock mount, which allows for more droop in the suspension. It's probably why we had that sway bar ball joint cam over on us. But irregardless, old spring's out. And what I'm doing now is I'm gonna go ahead and get the new spring ready to go in. And what I've done is just simply taken the piece that falls out on the top, put it on here, make sure it lays flat, it's ready to go, and it's gonna get shoved up in there. And then on the bottom side, we're gonna take this guy, just put it on, get it ready to go. And you're gonna wanna see it kind of line up so that, you see the two holes, right? You want those two holes to kind of line up in an orientation where you're gonna be able to get that bracket plate in there flat without having to spin it or do a whole bunch of work on it when it's up inside of there. So I'm gonna go ahead and shove this thing in there and see how it goes. What's interestingly enough is that these springs, even though they're supposed to provide a 2-inch higher lift, uncompressed, they're actually shorter than the springs we took out, which bodes well for my not having to use spring compressors to get them to go in here. The only thing I had to do on the way out was just give it a little bit of downward pressure on the hub to then make this side of the axle droop a little bit. Really easy extraction. Putting it back in is probably gonna be just as easy, I hope.
It was about this time that I realized something. So I set everything down and walked over to the other side of the rig and let the jack down just a little bit more.
All I did was just go over there and drop the jack and let the suspension completely sag on its own. And now I've got like an inch of gap in there. It's all good. So I'm gonna go ahead and start buttoning everything back up.
Now, when you go to put this plate back in, you're just going to want to go ahead and set the bolts through the holes in the plate and put the 2 washers on either side up against the plate. You see how my fingers are holding it there. And then all you got to do is just wiggle the plate around until you find it lining up with the plate on the bottom of the spring, which in turn will line up with the mounting holes on the axle. Just stick with it. You'll get it. Once you get it seated, go ahead and put the nuts on the bottom of the bolts by hand and then grab those 17 millimeters and go to town.
Okay, so that worked. I guess the lowered shock mounts work that way. Now I can see some problems. That's probably what caused the cam over on the sway bar ball joints, but it made it sure as hell easier to get this spring in here. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go ahead and jack this thing up, put the tires on it, put it back down, and then I'll reattach the sway bar and we should be good. So let's see. Okay, so we've got her back on the ground. Good news, everything's looking like it's sitting level and sitting pretty. So I think the back end is going to be a victory. So hopefully we can get this done and maybe make it out of the garage without having to take the rack off the roof. I don't know. This was the thing I was worrying about, because the Disco's already tall enough as it is, and now by adding the potential for 2 inches of lift, it could have screwed a few things up in my domestic life here.
Yeah, unfortunately she didn't make it out with the rack on top, but that's okay. At least this project's done. She's level left to right, and next week we're going to do the front springs so that she's level front to back. For a complete list of tools or parts used in this video, please check the link in the description below. As always, I'm Matt Kester. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Frugal Explorer Dad. Check out the channel at Secondhand Overland. Until next time, be good.